Hi everyone, good morning. So our topic for today is about the development of bilingualism. Now let's have first the definition of bilingualism and the bilingual education. So bilingualism. So we have already tackled the different definitions of bilingualism. So again, when we say bilingualism, it is the ability to communicate in two different languages. And when we say bilingual education, it is the use of two different languages in classroom instruction. Now, languages are learned most readily during the toddler, the preschool years, and to the elementary school. Therefore, children growing up in bilingual homes and or receiving bilingual education easily acquire both languages. Throughout the world, bilingualism is the norm for both children and adults. So this chapter or this topic looks at the various ways or routes in which children and adults become bilingual. Such routes include learning two languages early on in the home and then acquiring a second language in the street, in the wider community, in the nursery school, elementary or high school, and then after childhood, learning a second or foreign language by adult language classes and courses. So now we are in the types of childhood bilingualism. So there are two types of childhood bilingualism. First is the simultaneous. Second is the sequential. So let us first tackle the first type, which is the simultaneous. Okay, so simultaneous acquisition of bilingualism. So when we say simultaneous, it refers to a child acquiring two languages at the same time early in life, and then sometimes called infant bilingualism. So example here is that where one parent speaks one language to the child and the other parent speak a different language, then the child may learn both languages simultaneously. So now there are four dimensions or four basic dimensions along which the simultaneous acquisition of bilingualism in childhood varies. So these four dimensions translated into four questions. First one is that what languages or language is each parent able to speak? So it could be both parents, maybe both bilingual, or both parents may be monolingual. So in some family situations, the parents or guardians may be both be bilingual. So for example, here in the Philippines, the parents may be both able to speak Filipino language and English language fluently. And then also, both parents may be monolingual with the child and then acquiring the second language from relatives, neighbors, and the local community. And in other families or some other families, one parent may be practically bilingual and then the other monolingual. So it is important when asking the question of what language or languages each parent is able to speak is that the consideration is given to whether those languages are minority or majority languages. So let's say the most used or the majority language used was English or English in your family. So the second dimension is that what languages or language does each parent speak to the child in practice? While parents have the ability to speak both languages to their children, so there is often a conscious decision about which language to use with the child from birth upwards. According to this topic or according to my reference book, for example, a mother may use both English and Spanish with a child, or one parent speaks one language to the child and then the other parent speaks a different language. So, for example, the mother may speak Spanish to the child and the father will speak English to the child. Third dimension is that what language or languages do other family members speak to the child? So, according to Baker 2000, There are families where both parents use the same language in speaking to their children, but where the children speak to each other in the outside language. So, for example, parents speak their heritage language, for example, the Mandarin language, to their children, but when children speak to each other, use the outside language. So, for example, the English language. So, the outside language here refers to the language acquired in the street or school or playing with neighbors, which create bilingualism in the child. And the fourth dimension is that what language or languages does the child experience in the community? So, according to Kamin, the language experience in the networks of friends, the local community, and the nursery, school. So sometimes a child may experience both the languages of home and the outside world. So the children raised monolingually might pick up a second language outside the home. So for example, children whose parents speak Spanish to them in the home may attend an English medium nursery or English medium nursery school and become bilingual in that way. Okay, so some of the earliest research on bilingualism concerns detailed case studies of becoming bilingual, just like Ron Hatt 1913 described a case of the mother speaking German and the father speaking French in a French community. So Ron Hatt 1913 case study is introduced the principle of one person, one language. So that is a very effective method of raising children bilingually was for each parent to speak a separate language to the child. But the most detailed case study is still Leopold's study, which is one of the important aspect study is the shifting balance of two languages in childhood of his daughter. And his study is about his daughter Hildegard and based on the father speaking German in the home and the mother speaking English. So it is when Hildegard went to Germany, her German language becomes stronger. And when back in United States and attending school, Hildegard's English became the dominant language. So many bilingual situations are changeable, where at an individual level, the language shifts in dominance. So Hildegard, for example, was reluctant to speak German during her mid-teens, with German becoming the weaker language. Also, Leopold studied his second daughter, Carla. So Carla understood German but spoke very little German to her father. So in childhood, Carla was a passive bilingual. Yet at the age of 19, Carla visited Germany where she was able to change from receptive German to productive German, managing to converse relatively fluently in German. So that is the Leopold's study about the shifting balance of two languages. Next are the stages and milestone of a child. So the table shown the age, which ages from birth to 4 years and older, and then the stage, which are undifferentiated and the differentiated, and the milestone or the development of a child. So in the early ages or early stages of simultaneous bilingual language development, a child may mix words, parts of words, and inflections from both languages in a single sentence. Sometimes this occurs because a child knows a word in one language but not in the other. So some bilingual children initially resist learning words for the same thing in two languages. So children also may experience with their two languages for effect. For example, the child may know an object's name in one language but not the other, or use words from both languages in a single sentence, or the language mixing, or use word stems of one language with prefixes and suffixes from another language, which is called the language blend. And during the second stage of bilingual language development, at age 4 or older, children gradually begin to distinguish between the two languages and use them separately, sometimes depending on where they are. So one language may be used less formally to talk about home and family, whereas the other language may be used more formally, perhaps for relating events that took place outside the home. Children often find it easier to express a specific idea in one language rather than the other. So bilingual children that also go through periods when one language is used more than the other. So some children may begin to prefer one language over the other, particularly if that language is spoken more frequently in their home or school. Then bilingual children usually are not equally skilled in both languages, and often they understand more in one language but speak more in other. So these are the stages of development under in the simultaneous acquisition of bilingualism. So before considering the second type of acquisition of bilingualism, which is the sequential, it is important to mention the language loss in bilingual children. So in particular, children from language minorities, such as indigenous and particularly immigrant children, are sometimes at risk of losing their minority language. So with the higher status majority language ever present on the screen, in the street, at school, and in shops, then children quickly learn with which language has prestige, power, and preference. And then they quickly learn that they are different in language, behavior, ethnicity, culture, and some children, particularly teenagers, may come to perceive their language and cultural differences as undesirable. So there are studies, or there are researchers prove that language loss is a reality. So research by Hakuta and DeAndre 1992 and Wong Fillmore says that language loss in children is a reality in the United States. So researchers found in the US that early exposure to English language, example in the home, not only may mean for some children a shift from Spanish to English, but also the potential loss of Spanish. So such early exposure to English in the USA may also decrease the chances of placement in a dual education program where Spanish is used. So according to them, this is not a criticism of early bilingualism, but rather a warning that the minority language needs care and attention, the status and much usage in the young child. So this is not a limitation of early bilingualism, but rather a caution that minority language development needs particular nurturing in political situations where another language is ever dominant. So just like the study of Leopold about his children, Hildegard and Carla, if you could still remember recently. So when Hildegard went to the Germany, her German language became stronger. And when back in the United States and attending school, Hildegard's English became the dominant language. So a loss of the minority language may have a social, emotional, cognitive, and educational consequences for the child. And as Wong Fillmore argues that what is lost is no less than the means by which parents socialize their parent. So it is when parents are unable to talk to their children, they cannot easily convey to them their values, beliefs, understandings, or wisdom about how to cope with their experiences. Then, the dialogue that takes place between parents and children is an important contributor to the child's cognitive development. So as children interact with parents, they are introduced to the new features of language, such as syntax or the semantics or whatsoever. So when a child loses the home language, then the parent can no longer offer this language education to the child. This is according to the researchers. So we are now in the second type or pattern of the acquisition of bilingualism, which is the sequential. So when we say sequential acquisition of bilingualism, it refers to the situation where a child acquires a first language and then later becomes proficient in the second language. So the sequential acquisition of bilingualism takes us into the field of second language acquisition. So an example of a sequential child bilingualism is when a child learns the language at home, then goes to a nursery or elementary school, and then learns a second language. So there are two routes or ways of sequential acquisition of bilingualism, which is first the informal second language learning, which means that bilingualism is often achieved through informal acquisition process of the street and screen, neighborhood, and the newspaper. And the second one is the formal second language learning, in which where a second language is not acquired in the community or the natural second language acquisition, the school has been the majority institution expected to produce second language learning. So formally, through school, adult classes, and language courses, there is no single best route by which learners, young or old, become competent in a second language. So there are a variety of informal and formal educational means of acquiring proficiency in second language. So let's talk about the factors of sequential learning acquisition. So the age factor. So however, for other adults, second language acquisition sometimes become more voluntary and more open to choice. So this raises the issue of whether it is preferable to learn a new language as a child or as an adult. So a much debated theme in second language acquisition is the relationship of age in learning a second language and success in gaining language proficiency. So one argument is that the lower the age at which a second language is learned, the greater the long-term proficiency gained in that language is. So according to this point, young children learn language more easily and successfully. And others tend to argue that children or older children and young adults learn a language more efficiently and quickly than young children do. So example, a 14-year-old learning Spanish as a second language has superior intellectual processing skills than the 5-year-old learning Spanish. Therefore, the less time is required in the teenage years to learn a second language than in younger terms or younger years. So there is a comprehensive and balanced review of this area is provided by Singleton, 1989. So here is the comprehensive and balanced review of this area provided by Singleton, 1989. Singleton's analysis may be briefly summarized as follows. So first is younger second language learners are neither globally more nor less efficient and successful than older learners in second language acquisition. So there are many factors that intervene and make simple statements about age and language learning simplistic and untenable. Second, children who learn a second language in childhood do tend to achieve higher levels of proficiency than those who begin after childhood. So such a finding does not contradict the idea that someone can become proficient in learning a second language after childhood. So this tendency may be related to social context in which language is required, maintained, or lost, as well as to the psychology of individual learning. So younger children appear to pick up the sound systems of a new language more easily than adults. Third, in a formal classroom language learning situation, older learners tend initially to learn quicker than younger learners. However, the length of exposure is an important factor in second language success. So the length of exposure here refers to the number of years of second language instruction. So those children who begin to learn a second language in the elementary school and continue throughout schooling tend to show their higher proficiency than those who start to learn the second language later in their schooling. So in an absolute rather than comparative terms, this still includes the possibility of late learners becoming highly proficient, particularly when they are highly motivated. Fourth one is the support for foreign language instruction at an early age in school needs to find its rationally and support from areas other than second language research. So example, teaching a foreign language early in the elementary school needs to be defended in terms of general intellectual stimulation, the general curriculum value of teaching a modern language, the benefits of biculturalism, and the benefits of learning a language for as long as possible rather than quickly as possible. So second language instruction in the elementary school rests on the suitable provision of language teachers. So suitable materials and resources, favorable attitudes of teachers and parents, and the need to make the learning experience enjoyable. And the last one, in the United States, one pressure is for immigrant children to learn English as soon as possible. So some claim, without justification from research, that the optimal time to learn a language is at the age of 3 to 7 and because of supposed biological constraints, certainly before the puberty. Next is the trilingualism. So when we say trilingualism, it is where parents speaking two different languages to their children at home, and then the children then take their education through a third language. And next is the code switching. So code switching, it is a process of shifting from one linguistic code, a language or a dialect, to another depending on the social context or conversational setting. So code switches have a variety of purpose and aims. So code switching will vary according to who is in the conversation, what is the topic, and what kind of context the conversation occurs. So the languages used may be negotiated and may change with the topic of conversation. So that is why 12 overlapping purposes of code switching will now be considered. So here are the 12 purpose of code switching. So number one, code switches used to emphasize a particular point in a conversation. So if one word needs stressing or is central in a sentence, a switch may be made. Second, if a person does not know a word or phrase in a language, that person may substitute a word in another language. So this is often happens because bilinguals use different languages in different domains of their lives. So a young person may, for instance, switch from the home language to the language used in school to talk about a subject about mathematics or computers. Or an adult may code switch when talking about work because there are technical terms associated with work are only known in that language. Third is that words or phrases in two languages may not correspond exactly, and the bilingual may switch to one language to express a concept that has no equivalent in the culture of the other language. And the fourth one is that code switching may be used to reinforce a request. So for example, a teacher may repeat a command to accent and underline it. Be quiet, children. So in a majority or minority language situation, the majority language may be used to underline authority. Or a Spanish-speaking mother in New York may use English with their children for short commands like, stop it, don't do that, and then switch back to Spanish. Fifth is that some teachers in classroom explain a concept in one language and then explain it again in another language, believing that repetition adds reinforcement and completeness of understanding. So the number 5, this number is my usual doing in my classroom instruction. So next is to communicate friendship or family bonding. So for example, two people may be speaking Spanish together. So when one reports a previous conversation with an English monolingual, that conversation is reported authentically, for example, in English as it occurred. 7. In relating a conversation had previously, the person may report the conversation in the language or language used. And number 8, a person attempting to break into a conversation may introduce a different language. So interrupting a conversation may be signaled by changing language. So the message to the speakers from the listener is that I would like to become involved in this conversation. And number 9, if discussions are becoming tense in a committee, so the use of second language may signal a change in the tune being played. So just as in an orchestra, different instruments may be brought in during composition to signal a change of mood and pace, so as switch in language may indicate a need to change mood within the conversation. Number 10, for example, when two people meet, they may use the common majority language, so that is when the change of attitude or relationship. Number 11, which is to exclude people from a conversation. So for example, when traveling on the metro, subway, or underground, two people speaking English may switch to their minority language to talk about private matters, so thus excluding others from the conversation. And number 12, in some bilingual situations, code switching occurs regularly when certain topics are introduced. For example, money. So the Spanish-English bilinguals in the Southwest United States often switch to English to discuss money. So this suggests that code switching is not just linguistic. It indicates important social and power relationships. Okay, next is children as a language brokers. So in language minority families, children often act as interpreters or language brokers for their parents and others. So for example, in first and second generation immigrant families, parents may have little or no competency in the majority language. Therefore, their children act as interpreters in a variety of contexts. So rather than just transmit information, children act as information and communication brokers, according to Che, and often ensuring the message are culturally translated as in the following example. So father to daughter in Italian. So in English, tell him he is an idiot. So the daughter here translate the statement of his father in a good way, such like, my father won't accept your offer. So in this example, children act as a language brokers for parents with their proficiency in the majority language is ahead of their parents. So this has many advantages and disadvantages for the child. So one of the disadvantages is the pressure. So pressure here is placed on children in language brokering: linguistic, emotional, the social, and attitudinal pressure. So first, children may find an exact translation difficult to achieve as their language is still developing. Second, children may be hearing information, example, medical troubles, financial problems, arguments, and conflicts, that is the preserve of adults rather than children. So that is the disadvantage. So the advantage is that it can bring parental praise, reward, and status within the family for playing a valuable role. So the child learns adult information quickly and learns to act with some authority and trust, and so many more. So this is the end of my discussion about the development of bilingualism. So thank you for watching and listening to my report.